wat 'n opwindende aand het ons verder. Ek glo julle het ongelooflike discussions al klaar gehad oor Compassion en oor die Compassion. Ons groep het eers by Compassion uitgekom. Ek wil dit net vir die res online gou sê. Ons groep het net by Relationship kon stil staan en die video gekyk, maar wat 'n gesprek het losgekom. Julle kan nie glo nie, dis die einde van die jaar. Ons is in die middel van Life Work Leadership 2024-2025. Kan nie glo die jaar het so vinnig verbygegaan nie. En ek hoop elkeen van julle het 'n fenominale tyd en discussions en notes al in jou boek gemaak. Dus ek maak verskoning vir JD trek van hy trek, dis sy voorreg en dis ek staan in en ek is so bly Martin kan Afrikaans verstaan en Christopher kan Afrikaans verstaan dat ek die Afrikaans vandag kan gooi. Dit is baie dankbaar daaroor. Maar vandag het ons ek sê hierdie is een van ons hoogtepunt aande en elke aand is ek 'n fenominale mense wat met ons kom praat. Christopher gaan ons nou mooi voorstel, welkom hier by ons en dan het ons vir Martin. Nou Martin is eintlik al, jy is nou soos familie. Ek bedoel dis al die 4de sessie wat jy hier online by ons. Gewoonlik het hy online bygewoon. Ons het vandag hom nader getrek met 'n goeie hamburger hierso en hom ingedring in ons spasie in dat hy persoonlik hier kan wees. Al die pad uit Harties uit. Een van ons waardeer dit verskriklik baie. Ouens online gaan saam met jou lekker kuier vanaand en maar dan ook ek wens ek kan julle sy hele CV voorlees. Dit is ek gaan julle lank besig hou. Maar ek bedoel, dis al 'n baanbreker van 1994 af was hy een van ons eerste MEC's gewees van ons land. In die Noordwes gewees. Martin het die voorreg gehad om, soos hy nou gesê, die NPO van beroep van standaarde het hy gesê, die ou ek spot hy met daai ene. Maar en dan is hy life coach, executive coach, so vir soveel mense gewees, dien op soveel boards en die beste van alles is sy boek wat hy geskryf het, of nee, eintlik 'n paar boeke. Laas een Credibility Matters. Dis jou laaste boek nie, Martin? Is die eerste en die laaste een. Maar jy het net gestil gebly. Ek kon jou help en dat dit klink of jy baie geskryf het. Maar jy het eintlik so by Google by uitgevang. Dit is so 'n regtige voorreg om jou in die room te hê. Kan ons nou 'n lekker hande klap vir jou?
Okay. Well, thanks very much for that very kind introduction and good evening, all of you here and those joined us on the various campuses. It's a great privilege to be with the Doxa family again. I come a long way with life work. I was there since the very first retreat in Bronkhorstspruit. And I was invited by the late Karel Krieger, who was a campus pastor at that time in Schoemansville. And I've been through about 7 or 8 retreats. The only stoppage was during COVID. And what's so nice nowadays, the retreats found a permanent home now in Magaliespark. So I'm just across the dam and I join in every year with the folks there. Now, we're not only fighting against flesh and blood, we're also fighting against the clock. So let me get straight into what I wanted to do here tonight. And I would like to latch on to continue in the same vein that very powerful presentation made by my great friend Steve French along the lines of diversity. We laid a very powerful foundation on Jesus and diversity. I'm going to go into more on the practical side as I was journeying through my corporate and government career, the type of things that I've done to embrace this whole culture of diversity, lessons learned, and some of the principles that I think will be necessary, and I hope help you as well on your journey towards diversity. Now, we live in a very, very exciting country. Just 30 years ago, on the 10th of May, 1994, we came from groundbreaking. By then, we came from very groundbreaking election our first democratic election, and Nelson Mandela was standing here on the stairs of the Union Buildings, delivering his inauguration speech. And he casted a vision for South Africa of a rainbow nation at peace with itself and at peace with the world. Now, we've come a long way in building this rainbow nation and the new South Africa, and notwithstanding some of the vexing socioeconomic problems we're still experiencing in the country, nobody can deny that South Africa is indeed moved forward in many respects. It's only those who are blind and naive that will think, nothing has actually happened. Watch us on a Saturday night if we watch the Bokke. We even have a black captain now for the Springboks. That's how diverse we became. So there's, however, this uncomfortable piece of work which South African people and organizations have not properly engaged with. And that is the eradication of discrimination in all its forms. And tonight I want to speak to you around the theme, Mastermind What the Master Had in Mind, as we learned from Steve. Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, had diversity in mind. And if we are followers of Jesus Christ, we've got to follow suit. Now, in Song of Solomon, there's a very instructive verse there. Songs of Solomon 2 verse 15 says, "Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom." Now, one of these foxes represent the hindrances, the irritations and contradictions that detract from us and our ability to be a free, equal, and united nation focused on creating prosperity for all of us. Given the unfortunate past that we come from, the notion of race is still very much a body marker, and it remains deeply entrenched in the social psyche of our society. It not only performs the functions of sometimes putting artificial barriers between ourselves, but also robbing us of the opportunity to tap into the rich tapestry of our different cultures, the different lived experiences, and it impoverished us to a large extent. And I'm of the view that over the years, this dream of a rainbow nation at peace with itself, as envisaged by the founding father of our new democratic dispensation, has not been followed through with urgency, persistence, and attention to detail. And there are two issues that contributed towards this. The first is apathy. There's almost sometimes one observe a lack of feeling, emotion, and interest and concern. You see, beloved, just because we can now all stay together here in Midstream, which was not the same like in the past, our children can attend the same schools, we can access whatever public spaces necessary, does not mean that we do it out of the conviction of a shared identity and authentic acknowledgement of each other's humanity. Sometimes in my town now in Harties, it's been big in the news, just 100 meters from where I'm staying, there's a guy that put up a resort thing, bought expensive boats and so on. And the next thing, his whole place was burned down and there was a major flare up.
Try just to sort out your light. You can just go home.
Okay.
Because the people who want to Zoom just see the light is not good. Yeah. Okay.
And there was a big flare up, around, and I mean, I stay in Ireland for 20 years now. And over the years, I've seen how the demographics have shifted, but how people, it's just the nicest place to live. You must come actually to Schoemansville congregation on a Sunday morning of Doxa Deo. Even John said, this is what Doxa should look like. You get people from all walks of life, Germans, Malawians, Koreans, everybody, and it's a microcosm of what Doxa should look like. So we became a long way, and this singular incident started. There was now an attempt to portray Hatties as this racist town and all sort of things, and it was based on perception, partly, but also, there were evidence of deep-seated resentment within certain quarters there. And we do not talk about discrimination in all its shapes and forms in an empowering manner. We normally react when something happens and we ventilate our frustrations and we bring ESCOM into the discussion, we bring everything into the discussion just because something happened in a shopping mall. We are not sometimes equipped enough to engage constructively and continue a conversation until we realize that meaningful progress in this regard. This thing of discrimination and bias and all these type of things that I will speak about later on, we treat it sometimes like that uncle who is in jail. We all know about the uncle, but we don't want to talk about the uncle. When his name is mentioned, Freud, no, it's all right. But there's no detail. It's not for public consumption, but we know Uncle Freud was a skirt and is in trouble. So, the second thing is political correctness. It is a situation where we do not want to upset the apple cart, and there's almost a reluctance to challenge the status quo. I know in your ranks, in Afrikaner ranks, you're actually afraid, ek wil maar nie praat net moet sê hulle weet is 'n rasis. You rather to keep the peace. You rather not bold enough because you don't want to upset. Am I talking to the right audience? And sometimes in certain circles, when we call for accountability, the race card is conveniently pulled out. You see, daar begin hulle weer. No, before we had a contract. No. There are a bunch of this and a bunch of that, and we start labeling people just because they're calling for accountability. Now, the most devastating effects of this type of attitude of apathy and political correctness is that it undermines the development of our human capital. There's some smart people in South Africa over all races, colors, and creeds. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've experienced them. There's some smart people here. And if we can tap into that potential, I'm sure we would have been much better by now. Now, as Christian leaders in the marketplace, we will have to mastermind what the Master had in mind. When we have a grasp and a clear understanding of God's redemptive agenda in the world, we will become agents of change in a highly polarized world. Matthew 5, verse 13 to 16, three very powerful metaphors there. We are called the salt of the earth, the light of the world, and a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. These are three very powerful metaphors that speaks of influence, which means these things can't continue under our watch if we are having a grasp of the redemptive power of the kingdom, which means we must influence that environment with a new culture. We must influence that environment with a Christ-like nature. And we can't just be politically correct, and we can't be apathetic. That is not going to do the trick for us. We're going to lose, as a matter of fact, the Bible says, if the salt loses its saltiness, it will be as good as trampling it on the ground and useful to be thrown away as garbage. If we lose that influence, our nice little gatherings here on a Sunday will be of no effect if it does not affect the people, the environment in which me and you find ourselves from a Monday to a Saturday. And diversity is therefore a biblical imperative. We are called not to conform, but to transform. As we heard from Steve earlier on, when Jesus selected his team, to arguably shape the whole bringing a total new dispensation into the history of humanity, he had to make very sure how he select his team. And I don't want to repeat but there were fishermen there, tax collectors. There was even a modern day version of the EFF there as well, a guy by the name of Simon the Zealot, He was a radical fellow, but he was part of Jesus' team because Jesus believed in diversity. We've heard about the parable of the Good Samaritan. And therefore, the Great Commission warrants from us to go into all the world. We don't have a choice as to where God is going to lead us, who we're going to encounter on, and we need to have the right mindset all the time. Lord, how am I going to embrace this environment, maintaining my principles, maintaining my values, and represent you well in this situation? Now, let's zoom into the vexing question of diversity in the workplace. How do we go about co-creating a more inclusive environment to enhance our human capital development? Now, over the last 20-odd years in South Africa, there's been shifts, mostly legislatively driven. And, a lot happened in our workplaces during the advent of the first, the early 90s. The emphasis was on desegregation, changing the laws, and, where there was racial classifications and things to level the playing fields to some extent there. By the late 90s, it was more on affirmative action. It came with its own challenges, its own baggage. Some of it is still with us. And now diversity is beyond just affirmative action. Diversity in its true sense speaks of inclusivity in a myriad of ways: disability, gender, youth, sexual orientation, cognitive ability, the urban-rural bias, all those type of things is now part of the melting pot of diversity. And I read a recent article in the Harvard Business Review around the culture factor. And I like what they said, how they define organizational culture there. Culture is the tacit social order of an organization. It shapes the attitudes and behaviors in wide-ranging and durable ways. Cultural norms define what is encouraged, discouraged, accepted, or rejected within a group. And when properly aligned with personal values, drives, and needs, culture can unleash tremendous amounts of energy towards a shared purpose and foster an organization to thrive. I think mention was made earlier on of creating the right organizational culture. What is allowed, what is not allowed. And you don't come and tell us, what should be allowed here. This is the DNA on which this company has been found. These are the things that hold dearly, convince us differently, and we will follow suit. Now, coming back to diversity, it has been proven scientifically that, diversity brings about great advantages. Firstly, higher morale. People feel validated in an inclusive culture. No human being would like to feel ostracized, marginalized, not being accepted, and so on. My home language is Afrikaans, but I worked one time. I had an assignment in a company whose name shall remain nameless for now, but it's an agricultural company, a very strong Afrikaans culture. Now, they were making forays into Africa, and they were doing things in Zimbabwe, Zambia, all those places. And they brought people in on placements here in South Africa so that those people can experience the culture of the organization and the DNA and so on. But for heaven's sake, you can't put those people on Afrikaans 1 or Crash Course Afrikaans 101. This is not on. Because here comes Gladness or whatever from Zimbabwe. Hi guys, how are you? They greet Gladness and then they switch over Sari and them switch over in Afrikaans. And poor Gladness is standing there with the coffee and she's excluded. These are the realities that was communicated to me Now, I'm proud of my language. It's my mother tongue. Ek het Afrikaans Nederlands as hoofvak op universiteit gehad. Hoor, ek ken van Wyk loop van voor tot agter. But I don't want my language to be used to discriminate and exclude others. As a matter of fact, I want it to be used as an empowering vehicle. It also brings about, different perspectives and in a melting pot of ideas. If it's just my way or the highway, this organization, if the Titanic hits the iceberg there, you're going to be in trouble. And therefore, we must be able to accommodate even the people that differs with. Sometimes, we be so defensive that we're not open. And diversity also needs to make provision for different ideas. And ultimately, when you arrive at a specific point, now one of my board appointments, I was chairman of the Mine Workers Provident Fund for 9 years. It went well. It was just the Chamber of Mines, 9 members, National Union of Mine Workers, 9 members. And then came another crowd called AMCU. They came in and they won a lot of support in the mines. And instead of NUM being 9, they became 5. And NUM, there were 4 guys. There sits the poor chairman. He doesn't have a clue what these fights are all about because the shop floor stuff that finds its way into the boardroom. And initially I accommodated this thing, and at some stage I had to tell them, comrades, we're in a meeting here. We're talking pensions. Okay. Go and deal with your wage negotiations outside. Okay. I had to put my foot down. But I had to respect them and give them the view. At some stage I had to remind them, guys, we can't have a board meeting from 9 till 4. It's now, you don't want art in a party, no, man. It's just come for a board meetings. It also, if you go for global expansion, it's always good for a local company for an outside company to engage in local expertise. Those people understand some of the dynamics better than yourself. And that's where diversity comes in. But also, it's having the advantage of corporate citizenry because you need to understand the nuances of operating in different jurisdictions. Let me share with you my journey. I come from, you're in a hurry. But leave it. I come from a place called Alabama in Klerksdorp. I'm the eldest of 8 siblings and very impoverished setups, bucket toilet, 2-bedroom house. Some of us slept under the table, the room is full, that kind of thing. That was our life. But I always excelled academically and so on. They done very well in school, and leadership just came so natural. Ultimately ended up at the University of Western Cape. I wanted to become a teacher. I dropped out of varsity in the first year, not because of academic incapacity. It was just something happened at home. My father walked out, my pa het seep gaan koop en het net gegly. 25. It's gone. And I'm the eldest at home, and I didn't want to put my mom through that, so I went into a working environment. 2 years in industry, and then I joined the nursing profession. I was actually a nurse for 17 years. Started off as a student nurse, and then from there qualified as a professional nurse, studied at UNISA, became a lecturer there at the nursing college, and later on into management. 2 very nice things happened during my nursing career. The first one in Ward 7, 1979, I was working with one of my colleagues there for 7 nights in, 7 nights out. After the 7 nights out, I tell you, I realized something is missing. Because I will smile all by myself when a song plays there on the radio. You know those songs? Killing me softly with this song. Wat gaan nou hier aan? Tell a long story short, ultimately plucked up the courage to approach the lady and nee, moenie laugh as nie. Dat is maar net vriende bly. Jy gaan nou alles spoil. But I relented, and on the 4th of December 1981, we got married, and in the next few weeks, God willing, we'll be married for 43 years. And that's my family there. It's just by God's grace. Because the second thing that happened on the 9th, just 10 months after I got married, on the 9th of October 1982, in 'n ou AGS kerkie daar in my tuisdorp, I gave my life to Christ. And I never looked back after that. I'm not propagating perfectionism here. It's been a challenging journey, but I grew in grace. I never looked back. And this is my dear family. My eldest daughter, Esther, my son, Ezra, that's my wife in the middle, my little girl. Now, the two girls are out of the country. Esther is, my wife is currently with her in Melbourne, Australia. She's married to Stephen Harrison, and little Zoe works in South Korea. She left BMW and she got a different job there. So what I appreciate is that all three of my children are serving the Lord. And I couldn't have asked for better. It was tough, but they're all serving the Lord. Enough of my nursing days. In 1994, I joined politics. I was approached by the ruling party. By then, I was very active in my community. I didn't throw stones and petrol bombs. Don't get me wrong. I was just a social activist, helping where I can amongst the youth and all those sort of things. And they took notice of me. And they asked me, I submitted it to my pastor, and he counseled me along these lines, Pastor Tim Salmon, and his confirmation was God wants to lead you into something great. Arrived in the Northwest government, I only, within a matter of 5 days, my life turned around. Sworn in the Saturday, the next week, Wednesday, I stood before a judge, where I was appointed as the first MEC of Finance in the Northwest province. I didn't know a debit from a credit. And here I'm called upon to manage 4.8 billion rand. Talk about faith. I needed faith even to go and see Saul Kurz, because we used to have shareholding in Sun International those days. But through God's grace, I survived 10 years, 2 successive terms. I still hold the distinction, through God's grace, of being the longest MEC of Finance in this country. Heads were rolling all over the place, but God sustained me. And after 2 success, now if your name appears at the golf club as an honorary member, your time is up, man. It's becoming a maintenance job. And so we saw the Lord's face there in a place called Modimola, and we just knew that my time is up. And I ended up at the South African Bureau of Standards. Arrived here, the place is in a mess. 2 weeks before my arrival, the people from Pretoria might remember that there was a lady that was shot, and by one of the employees, and the guy turned the gun on himself. He died before, and 2 days after that, she died in Little Company of Mary Hospital. I think it's now Life Full Club, yeah. Now, that's 10 days before my arrival. Here comes a new CEO, and everybody expect me to be MacGyver with a pocket knife, performing stunts there and fix the place, because the place was in a mess. For 8 months, they didn't have a CEO. People had legitimate expectations when I walked in there, and like Jesus, 18 months, I didn't have the luxury of 18 months, but I took at least a bit of time just to listen. And there were many contradictions floating around. Ultimately, I realized that, there's legitimate expectations. On the one hand, you have emerging Black professionals, did their MBAs and honors degrees in science and technology. They came with great expectations to advance in the space, but there were glass ceilings. But then you also had legitimate fears from Sarah, Harvey. These guys didn't have any other life. They were there 39 years. They were, world specialists in own name and right. And in the previous dispensation, some of them were child. And I had to manage the legitimate expectations from Tarisang and Tavo and them, and also how do I deal with them, Harvey and them, because they also have institutional memory and they're a great asset to this company. We then went into a very, very intensive exercise because I came to the realization that SABS cannot deal with its tomorrow until they've dealt with their yesterday. There was just too much baggage floating around there. And I brought in 3 people. There was Dr. David Malampo, Dr. Ketsu Mabusela, and who knows on Blackie Swart? Blackie Swart. Now, Blackie was actually a playwright in the army. Some majoor or something like that. Half-colored, that guy, Blackie Swart. And he defended himself so that people could not get near him, otherwise they're going to discover he's a bastard. I brought Blackie in, and we worked on challenging paradigms, and there were a lot of paradigms, the gender paradigm, the age paradigm, the geographical paradigm, head office versus the regions, and so on. The older people telling the youngsters, jou universiteitsprofessor het nog nooit in die praktyk gewerk. Ek werk al 20 jaar, so ek weet wat ek doen. And they're just making new proposals on how they can improve. So we had to deal with all those paradigms. We ultimately had them in focus group discussion. And I saw the Lord doing a miraculous work there, how people started crying because a lot of stuff was based on perception and not facts. The moment you drill down to the facts, you totally disarm. Somewhere in a taxi, things were said about white people, and then it becomes gospel when you enter the yard. Somewhere at the Braaivleis fire, after the Blue Bulls have played, something was said about black people, and that framed the concept of how some of my guys saw black people when they come. And once you start asking for detail, ek meen maar net, jy weet, dis maar hoe ek ervaar. And we challenged those things. And I saw big people crying, hugging each other and asking each other for forgiveness for harboring things in their hearts that was not based on fact, but on perception. That can only be God. From there, we move forward and we reach consensus what the desired SAB should look like. We captured in a roadmap those days. I came in 2004, and we had a 5-year roadmap to 2010. Because I believe you can't measure it, you can't manage it, and we have clear milestones, how we're going to move it forward. Now, how did I maintain the momentum? And one of the key things, we're going to drive diversity. But we drive diversity not to the exclusion of others. We're going to drive diversity in an inclusive culture. And how do we maintain the momentum? Firstly, we select the champions to drive the process. I couldn't drive this thing from the 8th floor. We had to look at potential people that can drive it. I also had to lead with example. I recall of one guy that was recommended to us. He came highly acclaimed Christian brother and so on from one of the top financial institution, became a marketing director. The guy is 6 months, 7 months in a job and mess around with the credit card. Broer, jy moet maar gaan. Laat nou die kerkstories uit, maar jy was skelm gewees hierso. Ons gaan jou met die disciplinêre verhoor. The guy resigned and he spoke a lot of stuff and a few others because these were my people that I brought in and people were watching me. Am I going to be consistent with everybody? I had to lead by example. We also had authentic, to maintain a momentum, we had to embark on authentic feedback. I had these sessions called Martin's Moments. Every second week, around the table, a basket of muffins, coffee, and we will select randomly from all different departments and different levels of staff. And we will just basically ask 3 questions around the transformation journey that we embarked upon. What happened? What's missing? What's next? What happened? What's missing? What's next? How do they experience the transformation? Is there anything that they see that we don't see at the top? And how can we? And such a lot of peer learning took place. We were able, and we also disarmed the rumor mongers because now they heard it from the horse's mouth. People will come with stories and say, no, you're talking nonsense. We were the CEO just yesterday. This is the line of march in this company. And by being
giving authentic feedback, and where there are blockages, we unblock it. We were honest about some of these limitations. We also broke glass ceilings, I had to restructure the company and have a technical component and a managerial component. So that Omgavi, who's now 32 years in the pump, I didn't demote him as manager of the pump station. I made him the senior technical specialist. Because Omgavi doesn't want to sit in meetings. It irritates him to listen to health and safety reports. Man, ons wil even gaan werk, maar Martin, jy praat bietjie te veel hierso. It's not in his nature to sit around the table, and go through a risk matrix and all sort of things. He wants to be in the lab with his white coat on and do tests. So we made him the senior technical specialist. And how is one of his KPIs? He must develop a knowledge management system, which means all experience that's in his head. Maar jy weet, ek kan mos nog nie skryf nie en so aan. Nee, praat net, record, hulle sal vir jou aftik. That's how the knowledge didn't go with Omgavi and Omdavi and them. It was captured nicely. The third thing that I also did with the senior technical specialists, they must identify their successors, at least 3 of them. And, ek kan sê ek is bietjie moeg nou, ek wil hom aftree. Maar wie is die opvolger dan? Nee, jy kan kies tussen al 3, maar die ladies doen baie goed. Hulle is reg om my job oor. You see what I'm trying to say? By not humiliating people, but acknowledging their strengths, playing to their strengths, and by so doing, we were able to retain the skills, but also transfer the skills so that there was a natural succession moving on. We broke glass ceilings, we celebrate achievements. And what were the results? We brought SAPS into the top 10 certification. When under my watch, we occupied one of the top 10 positions of certification bodies in the world. The company's profitability rose. There was a massive reduction in staff turnover. People started to be valued. They knew that there's a career path for them to go. And then in Ottawa, when was it? I left there 2009. Yeah, 1996 in Ottawa, I was asked to deliver a paper there on the turnaround strategy of SAPS. The morning I delivered that paper, that afternoon I got elected onto the ISO Council, the highest standardization body in the world. I used to fly to Geneva at least 4 or 5 times a year, sitting with all those gray-headed guys, very clever people. It's the only guy that used to joke with me was Dr. Paolo Scolari, the international chairman of FIA. Martino, this game of cricket. What's happening? It takes too long, man. He was watching a test game there. He bored him, so I must explain to him this funny game of cricket. But we had an international expansion. Our footprint extended to 16 countries. My last assignment was to set up an office in Shanghai, do 3 verification audits before the stuff gets imported. Now, I also served on the board of Netcare for 14 years as non-executive director, and I was, part of the social and ethics committee. And one of our major outputs was to look at diversity, making sure, that the culture is right and so on. Now, Netcare only had 0.31% representation in 2010 on people with disabilities. And we set an ambitious target of 3% representation by 2020. And we launched a vehicle called Sinako. It's a learnership program. Sinako means care. And at the end of 2021, our representation stood at 3.6% from a lousy 0.31. How did we get it right? The lessons that we learned, for change to occur, we had to provide a framework about how this change should occur. And then put management systems in place to track these things. You can't operate on assumptions. You need to track these things and measure output. We had to measure how it is happening and where it is not happening. And our role and management role was to unblock those things and give the necessary support, because sometimes there were barriers in the system. Sometimes the barriers might be physical, sometimes it might just be attitudinal, and we had to unblock all those things. How do we change paradigms? It is only through culture engagement that we can have a better understanding of the people around us. In my personal life, the following questions greatly assisted me to look through the world through a total different phase. You might have seen my family photo. I'm married to a Tswana woman. I paid Lobola, okay? It was no big deal to walk my daughter down the aisle and hand her over to a white Australian guy. Very good people, the Harrisons. I stayed in a colored area, worked in a black hospital. My children attended an Indian school, English medium. Was a civil servant. I didn't have money to send them to private schools. And on Sunday, I will rock up at the predominantly white church at Rhema. Only 4 black families those days. No, it was First Word of Life. And the AWBS decided on the 16th of December 1992 to bomb our church. Ter nagedagtenis van die gelofte. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? That's it. So don't tell me nothing happened in this country. A lot of beautiful things. So these questions always, who are my friends? You see, if you don't build relationships across the racial line, your outlook in life will be severely constrained. There's so much richness in our diversity. And I don't say, you need to be in and out of each other's homes every now and then, but just start attempting to show a genuine interest in building genuine things to understand their world and your world. Each white person should at least attend a black funeral. En hy begrafnis raak nie klaar nie. En as 'n hele fees, dit word geslag en allerlei. But unlike you guys, the white guys, you go to their funeral and it appears like a Kentucky drive-through experience. Jy dump somebody lijk net daar gaan jy ander mense. Daai mense, en nou sukkel julle om te rou na dit, verstaan jy? Nou is julle by die psigiaters en allerlei mense. Hulle het nie tyd gemaak daai week om te huil, die ding uit te praat. Do you want to practice? Don't throw rocks at me. So, who are your friends? You see, if you are always in the company of the old boys club, that's going to shape your paradigm for the rest of your life. And you guys are going to become so predictable towards one another. Life is about taking risks, taking well-calculated risks. Jesus had to take a risk with the tax collector, isn't it? So to take a risk with these fishermen. They were not the smartest guys to pluk them. Well, he regarded them as sufficiently important to be his disciples. Secondly, what is my understanding of other people's life experiences? What makes them mad? What makes them glad? And what makes them sad? I know it's a church environment here, but other people can just simply say, "Jong, ek is nou sommer baie gat vir ons." It becomes just second nature. And to black people, hey, he speaks very bad, he likes to swear, but they feel it offensive. Okay. And if you don't understand that if they feel offensive, dan say, I'm only petty is nie, man. But wat wil jy nog jou staan en kwaai? Ek praat maar net so, ek is so gemaak en so gelaat staan. No. You can't be so gemaakt and so laat staan. There are sensitivities that you need to manage in a diverse environment. The third thing is, who are my role models? If I ask you who's your role model, I'm sure your hands are going to up. Nelson Mandela. But there's some smart people out there. He might be just an ordinary teacher. He might be, just a well-mannered man in society that are not academically astute, but rich in wisdom. When you sit and talk with them, you can see they don't cut and paste stuff from Google. It just comes naturally. Wise people. These are the type of people that you need to emulate and link up with them as role models. Partly, do I model the right values in my family? Do I equip my children? You know what is said around the dinner table about other races and about other people, that shape our children's outlook, and this is how they approach the world outside. And be careful what we speak in front of our children. Because if we say these things, they believe it. They trust Ma and Pa's judgment. It becomes gospel to them. And that's why they're going to battle in the outside world. And the world is now becoming globalized. I told you my two daughters are out of the country. And I could not, must be very careful that what you do must not inhibit your children not to thrive in a highly globalized environment. So be careful what we say and the type we say. Zoe told me one time in no uncertain terms, I don't know, one of these guys were making some, I won't mention his name, and I said something and she said, Pa, you're a closet racist. Just like that. Shut up onmiddellik. Die nuus doodstil vir so halfuur en sy vermeetheid om vir my te vra, so jy nie koffie nie, Pa? Nou uitgesorg is 'n closet racist. Perfectly guard your heart against stereotyping and generalizations. We can so easily put people in a box. White people are racist. Do you know every white person in South Africa? And on what scientific basis did you arrive at that assumption? Blacks are a scandal, but blacks here. Do you know all the black people in South Africa? And just because somebody grabbed your cousin's cell phone somewhere, a strong scams? So be careful about generalizations and stereotyping and so on, because Chamanda Adichie said it so beautifully. He said the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. There's always three sides to a story. It's your side, it's my side, and then there's the truth. And our desire must to zoom into the truth at all times. Be vigilant against unconscious bias. Bias is prejudices in favor against one thing or another, or a person or a group. That can be considered unfair. But just be careful, that you don't withhold judgment unless you know all the facts, because you can in a very biased manner enter the discussion. Seventh point I want to raise is create opportunities to engage in open discussion about the realities of racism. Sometimes there's a movie that plays on TV. Make that a learning experience in our house. How would you have reacted if somebody responded to that? And learn out of that and be open about it and communicate those values. This is not how we're going to treat other people, because if you create those learning opportunities, they will even have respect for the auntie who works for you, that look after your kids when you are at work, man. And that auntie will be treated with respect because you inculcate those values. Now, the last thing I want to raise is that we must speak the truth in love. It's sometimes not what we say, it's how we say. We can be so rightfully wrong at times. Therefore, let's be careful as we talk. We must be well considered. I'm concluding. And I'm wary of speakers that tells us I'm concluding. Because they start off with lastly, then it's finally. I'm definitely at the conclusion now. I'm not preaching now, I'm telling you the truth. South Africa is a great country. Do you believe that? tremendous amount of goodwill as I move amongst the different races and so on. And by the way, in 2011, I was acting president van Afrikaanse Handelsinstituut. I used to carry a chain like this, meneer die president. Kan ek maar kieters rus toe daar en met my lang baard oomies praat daar, meneer die president. But we had to work in those environments to bring communities together, business communities and so on. Harry Smith with Ben Daisel and all these kind of guys. So, what am I saying? Christian leaders in the marketplace have a critical role in transforming society, not out of a grudging compliance because the laws of South Africa say so, but an inner conviction, doing the right things for the right reasons. Edsel Vossel, and I would like to encourage all of you to read his book, Anointed for Business. He makes this following statement. He says, God's agenda for this generation and the chief catalytic force to bring it about will be Christian believers ministering in the marketplace. I believe that a carpenter, accountant, doctor, or CEO is just as much a minister as a TV evangelist, and that his life and business practice are their most effective servants. Don't tell us about you should have been our service this weekend at Doxa Midstream. Woo, what a blessed time and so on, No, in the meantime, you've been arrogant the whole morning, shouting at everybody and so on. It's too late to tell them 3 o'clock in the afternoon about what happened at Doxa. Will never put their foot here. They want to see you. The biggest sermon is how you conduct yourself from 7 o'clock in the morning. Respect, inclusivity, and the like. In a slide, in a letter from the Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King says, real change comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We are co-workers of God to bring about a redemptive work on the earth. And diversity includes that redemptive work. Let's mastermind what the master had in mind. I hope if I haven't convinced you, that I've at least confused you. Anyway, are there any questions? We still have a few minutes. Then.
2 minutes, yeah.
2 minutes, okay.
Questions? You see if there's any questions on the briefs?
Julle so stil in die Presbyteriaanse kerk. Sê die amen.
Is there a lot?
There is a question on the group from one of the groups said, was there any experience you can share where you were excluded and discriminated against, how you deal with it, or how Jesus should have had for you in that moment?
Quick one that comes to mind is that the South African Breweries comes there at the invitation of my premier. Big delegation, top brass from SA Breweries addressed the Executive Council of Northwest telling us about the millions of rands they've invested, the jobs, the social programs, and all those sort of things. Then the next thing, there's a photo shoot with these guys. Myself and the late colleague of mine, Dr. Molifi Sifularo, just excuse ourselves from the photo shoot because we didn't want to be associated with these fellows. Sifularo knows, he told us, say, Martin, you know how much money we spent here on trauma and, all the family disintegration. These guys are playing games with us. They are more liability to you and me than anybody else here. And us endorsing them here, smiling in front of them here. I tell you, they called us, holier than thou. We drunkards, let us smile. He walked out. It feels humiliating, isn't it so? You can imagine, you just stood up for, I'm not going to, because there is condemnation by association. I can't endorse here. Hey, the finance and the health guys, they support SA Breweries. What will the people think of me, my testimony? will be adulterated. I can also tell you of one example. It was my premier's birthday. The 26th of February is his birthday. Thabo Mbeki by then is in the province for Freedom Day. We had a lot of work to do that day, and the evening we drove to Popo Malife's house. Thabo Mbeki is going to propose a toast. Now you can't say no. The president is here. We are here with the blue lights from Lichtenburg. Government likes to show off, must say. President has got 6 cars and all sort of. We arrived there. It was Thabo Mbeki sitting there. It was my wife, Liz. It was me. God be my witness, Thabo Mbeki asked me that evening, Comrade Martin, you don't mind if I just take a small shot of whiskey? I don't want to offend you. I never preached to the guy. I never told him what a great Christian I am. The president of this country asked me permission to take a whiskey in front of me. I don't want to offend you. We drove back that evening. I asked Leslie to hear the president. And that instilled in me that holy courage to say people are watching us. They are observing us, not on what we say, but what we stand. I totally forgotten about the SA breweries, guys. The president has spoken. He respects them. They can go, those guys, with their beer money. I hope I've answered the question. Okay. Any more questions?
About diversity, I think something totally different that might be a bit big in the future, where things like transgender sekerheid gaan ook in besighede inkom.
Die skole ook.
En in skole ook, en hoe jy as Christen dit moet hanteer, want dit is toch deel van diversity, maar wat sê ons het woord ook?
The approach is twofold. Is our position, and secondly is our posture. Our position is very clear. It's what the word of God says. But our posture is a posture of love. It's not a posture of condemnation. If so-and-so, whatever her sexual orientation is, if she's the manager of a specific division and you need to sit in the same exco, you don't walk out when she comes in. That's not the right posture. You will only win them over by being an extension of God's love. There will come a time when something goes wrong in that lady's life, and because of your attitude, she'll have the confidence to approach you. Then you can present the type of stuff which we know we're very good at, presenting Jesus to them in that circumstance. But you will have lost the opportunity if your position is correct, but your posture is. Fluit my stories uit.
Dit is so saam met jou staan wat ek al op die ander kant op my kan sê. Kan ons sê vir Martin 'n lekker ander klap. Dit is een van die moeilike onderwerpe wat jy met soveel genade en soveel liefde vir ons kom oopbreek het. Ek dink elkeen wat hierso sit word ons uitgedaag op 'n ander manier. Ek wens ons kon nog 'n halfuur 'n discussie losmaak. Ongelukkig het ons nie tyd vir dit nie, maar ons wil vir jou regtig dankie sê dat jy elke keer Jesus vir ons kom demonstreer het. Dus ons gaan met 5 minute breek van en dan gaan ons vir Christopher al geleentheid gee om te sê en dis ons is 5:08 is ons weer by mekaar. Van daai 5 minute breek kry gou 'n koppie koffie.
Nie 'n lang CV.
Dit is allemaal reg op die video's, dit is so lekker. Christopher, jy volg vanaand hier saam met ons te hê.
Ja.
En ek ons het nog 'n paar koffies deurgewerk.
Ja.
En elke keer dan probeer met ons besef ons net die tyd raak te kort. Dit is want Christopher is een van die mense wat een van die stories geskryf het in die lewe waar hy by 'n mannegroep is wat diversiteit beleef. Ek wil smaal dit oor sy mannegroep is.
Ja.
Die mannegroep is as een ding, jy moet in die natuur wees met jag. En dit is die twee goed. Dit is 'n klompie manne wat hulle daarby mekaar kom en saam droom oor die Here. Dis die een kant lief vir die Here. Aan die ander kant was dit een van daai stories waar hulle begin het met 'n besigheid wat hy hulle meer sal vertel het en van niks af opgebou het, deel geword het van Dis-Chem en dan smaak ek altyd, dan skyn hy Jesus se lig binne in Dis-Chem soos min mense op 'n praktiese manier dit regkry. Dis Christopher, vir ons voorreg dat jy met ons kom praat en jy tyd vanaand uitsit vir jou vloer is joune.
Baie dankie, hè. Ek is net half Engels, so hier na 8 dan begin ek ook uit vocabulary uithaal.
En jy kan alles Afrikaans.
Okay, dis nou laat John, my hele speech is in Engels. So ek anyways, okay. Nou sal ek volgende keer sal ek weet. So julle gaan nou weer bear met my Engels vanaand. So yeah, but good evening everyone. I consider it obviously an honor to be here tonight to talk about a very important and I think sometimes a confusing concept. I must be honest, when Rulin reached out to me the first time, I was obviously excited about the opportunity to address the LifeWork leadership team again. And until I heard the theme, she said to me it was compassion. So I couldn't help but think about a test that I did a few years back with my management team called Gallup, the Clifton Strength. It's a typical psychometric test where they do, based on a lot of questions, they give you your 34 themes of talent and they rank them from 1 to 34. Now, there's 34 themes, okay, and they're ranked in accordance with your personal dominance. So obviously empathy is one of these themes. And you want to guess where my empathy lies? Number 34. Exactly. So that's my empathy. Well done. You know me, eh? Okay, we've met before. Okay, so I thought just God must be challenging me. I'm definitely going to push me outside of my comfort zone. But remember, the fact that it's at number 34 doesn't mean that I have no compassion. I just have to work very hard at it. And being as a first profession, a pharmacist, in our industry, I mean, you need to have empathy. Can you imagine a pharmacist with no empathy? Would be a bit of a challenge. So in any case, I decided, listen, obviously, I had to pray about this and I had to take a lot of guidance in terms of what I'd go about. But I even grew up in a business era where, I mean, in our family business, when your staff, we would have a staff meeting once a week. And as your staff arrived at work, you would tell them, literally, you would tell them, guys, you leave your personal trouble outside today. When you step through those doors, you leave the personal stuff at home and you come into work because, yeah, you have to focus on your job. And tonight, when you go home, you pick up that bag and that's when you sort out your issues. And I mean, that's how I grew up in a business environment. That's how we got taught. That's how we got coached. So yeah, maybe that had an impact on my empathy. But yeah, so I decided to do a bit of research on it. And I want to start with, firstly, definitions, just to clarify some things. So compassion and empathy are fundamentally different, but very closely related. And I want you to consider these definitions. Empathy is our feeling or awareness towards other people's emotions. And it's an attempt to understand how they feel, to put yourself in their shoes and understand their emotions. The compassion difference is that compassion is an emotional response to empathy or sympathy, but it creates a desire to help. And that is the difference of empathy and compassion. So empathy is an understanding of our shared humanity. It's the ability to see yourself in someone else's shoes, where compassion adds another dimension, and that is a desire to help. So if we look at an example in the Bible, if we go to slide 2, compassion, the difference is that it demands action. So empathy, there's no real action. I just have to feel. I feel with you. I cry with you. But compassion takes you to the next level. It says, listen, I have to act on this. And what I also found in the study is that compassion is actually the ability to, in an emotional state, withdraw yourself from the emotion, because then you can think clearly and you can act clearly. So that's one of the definitions that I found that made a lot of sense. So if we look at Mark 1, verse 40 to 41, on one occasion, a leper came and threw himself down in front of Jesus, pleading for his healing, saying, "You have the power to heal me right now, if only you really want to." Being deeply moved with tender compassion, and Jesus is probably the perfect example of compassion. Jesus reached out and touched the skin of the leper and told him, "Of course I want you to be healed. So now be cleansed." So the key point in there is that Jesus had to perform an action. He had to reach out and he touched the leper. And that is how he healed him. Okay. So Matthew 20, verse 34, Jesus was deeply moved with compassion. Once again, that compassion toward them. So he touched their eyes and instantly they could see. Once again, that action. Jesus didn't speak only. He touched them. And that is how he showed his compassion, and that is how he healed. So the action component of compassion is what makes it work. It takes clear-eyed view of what a person is doing and where they are falling short, and look for ways to get them past that point of struggling. Practicing compassion is an important element to being an effective servant leader. I mean, Jesus was once again a prime example of a servant leader. Understanding what your people need to succeed and having the desire to help them succeed is fundamental to service in a business concept. Compassion and self-compassion helps leaders create an environment where growth can happen. Research has shown that practicing compassion not only makes the individual happier, it also creates an environment that elevates everyone around them. And when I share a life story with you later, you'll see the experience of how it literally involves and impacts a lot of people around you, a whole community, if you do it right. Compassion is possibly only when we think of others before ourselves. Self-centeredness keeps us from seeing the needs and hurts of those around us and acting on their behalf. What we need is a renewed mind. We need to change our mindsets. This comes from Ephesians 4, verse 22 to 24. We are all born with a selfish, sinful nature, referred to as the old self. But when a person puts his trust in Jesus, he receives a new self, created in righteousness by God. As our minds are renewed with his word and we grow in obedience, Christ's love and compassion begins to flow through us. Instead of our being oblivious to the pain and suffering around us, God will open our eyes and use us to comfort those in need. A heart of compassion is achieved not through self-effort, but through a God-focused life. As we draw near to him, through his word and his son, he transforms our focus, thoughts, and feelings. What a relief to know that God has provided everything we need to follow Jesus' example of caring. He always equips us to obey his every command. So once you start moving closer and closer to Jesus, it becomes almost impossible not to show compassion. Because if you take Jesus inside of yourself, I mean, he has the ability to give you a supernatural view of the people and the emotions around you. And it is through those eyes that you must look at the world. And that's how we identify need. I'll touch on that a bit later. So if we go to slide 3, there's 3 things that compassion does. Firstly, compassion interrupts. And I'll take you an example in the Bible. Secondly, it's going to cost you something. And the third thing that is definitely going to change lives. So if we look at the interrupt, I want to share a story with you. I like listening to podcasts. And one of the great leaders out there that I like to follow is Craig Rochelle. I think he's a great leadership coach. So he was telling a story. He'd been at a sermon and he was running late. And as he arrived at the airport for his flight home, he missed his flight. And he was delayed at the airport for 2 hours. And he says he was knackered. I mean, it was a draining session. He sat there at the airport and he thought, yes, I just need these 2 hours on my own. And he went and he sat down in the lounge. And the next thing, a lady walked into the lounge. And when he made eye contact with her, he realized that he knew her. And he thought, please, just pass me by. Don't come and greet me. Don't. The next thing, she stands right in front. And he looks up and she says to him, Pastor, I'm in your church. He says, no, I recognize you. I can see that. And the next moment, she burst out in tears. And he said he knew there. He has trouble. So he sat her down and she started telling the story. She'd just been the previous day at a youth business conference. They had a party the evening. She had to make too much to drink. Ended up sleeping with someone. Happily married. And she laid all this on him. He says, Amos, now I'm knackered. All of a sudden, this woman blurts this on. And he says he spent the next half an hour praying for her, taking her through a process, explaining and saying, listen, there's obviously just one way to solve this. You have to come clean. I mean, you have to share this with your husband. That's the only way. You're happily married. You made a mistake. You have to share it. And he took her through the process. He said, all right. It was the Friday. They were both flying home. She said the next morning, Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, I'm going to break the news to my husband. Craig said, perfect. He's going to start praying at 10 o'clock. So the next morning, 9 o'clock, Craig takes his daughter to a party and he drops her off there. It's a 3-hour party and he's now got 3 hours to kill. He drives around. 10 o'clock, he's praying for this lady. And he says at about 10:30, he gets this feeling he's got to go to Walmart. It's as though God says to him, go to Walmart. And he says he hates Walmart. You know, he doesn't know what he's going to do there. He heads off to Walmart. As he walks into Walmart, he walks into the power tool section because that's the only place where he feels comfortable. The next thing, there's a guy stand there. And the guy looks up at him. And Craig looks at him. And as he approaches him, the guy says to him, Pastor, I'm in your church. And the next thing, this guy bursts out in tears. He says to Craig, you met my wife at the airport last night. And you told her to share with me what she had done. He said, when she told it to me, I broke out in tears. And for some reason, the only place I could think of going was Walmart. And they both ended up there. And I mean, after half an hour's discussion with him, they reconciled, they're still happily married. The point being that these compassion events will interrupt a certain circumstance. He was delayed on the flight for a reason. He met that lady for a reason. The next day was going to Walmart for a reason. All of these things interrupt. So if we look at the Bible, an example in the Bible is in Mark 6, verse 30. The disciples had returned from their mission exhausted, and there was such a swirl of activity around Jesus that they couldn't even eat a meal. So Jesus said to his disciples, come, let's take a break and find a secluded place where you can rest a while. They tried to slip away by sailboat, but people saw them and followed them. In verse 34, it says, by the time Jesus came ashore, a massive crowd was waiting. At the sight of them, his heart was filled with compassion because they seemed like wandering sheep who had no shepherd. Later, the disciples told him that they should send them away to buy food. We all know how this ended. It was an incredible miracle. Point being, Jesus took his disciples away. He wanted to give them a break. All of a sudden, a big crowd appears. They interrupt the whole situation, and that leads to him feeding, they reckon 20 to 25,000 people. I mean, they spoke about 5,000 men, but they reckon it's about 20, 25,000 people. On the second point, it's going to cost you something. The example I want to use in the Bible is in Luke 8, verse 41. Jesus was on his way to heal Jairus' 12-year-old daughter when a huge crowd surrounded him. In the crowd that day was a woman who had suffered greatly for 12 years from slow bleeding. In verse 44, it says, pressing in through the crowd, she came up behind Jesus and touched the tassel of his prayer shawl. Instantly, her bleeding stopped and she was healed. Jesus suddenly stopped and said to his disciples, someone touched me. Who is it? I mean, the disciples said, come on. There's like 5,000 people around us here. Someone touched you. Obviously, someone touched you. In verse 46, Jesus replied, yes, but I felt power surge through me. Someone touched me to be healed, and they received healing. Now, the point is, in this example, it cost Jesus power. And sometimes it cost him energy. Sometimes in life, your compassion. There's times that it's going to cost you money. There's times it's going to cost you your time. There's times it's going to cost you energy. It's going to cost you something. If we look at the third example, it changes lives. In Mark 2, verse 1, Jesus was preaching the word of God in a house in Capernaum when 4 men carrying a paralyzed man opened the roof above Jesus and lowered the man down. Now remember, Jesus is busy preaching. He must be at a height. All of a sudden, the roof opens. Someone drops it down. You know, in a case today in your boardroom, in a business meeting, we'd call security. That's what we do. But that interruption, when Jesus saw the extent of their faith, he said to the paralyzed man, my son, your sins are now forgiven. In verse 12, it says, when the crowds witnessed this miracle, they were awestruck. They shouted praises to God and said, we've never seen anything like this before. Their lives were changed forever. So those 3 things, compassion will always interrupt you. Compassion is without doubt going to cost you something. But compassion will change the people around you's lives forever as well. Now, if we go to slide 4, you might say, but I've got nothing to give. Well, I'll share something in Acts 3 with you. Peter and John were on their way to the temple when they passed a beggar who'd been lame from birth. In verse 4, Peter said, "Look at us." So the beggar looked at them and gave them attention, expecting to receive something from them. Then Peter said, "Silver and gold I do not have, but what I do have, I give to you." Point being, if you don't have the funds, if you don't have the finances, it's not always about that. Sometimes it's a prayer, it's a touch, it's a share, it's just compassion. It's just sharing time with someone. Some people just want you to listen. Doesn't always have to cost you money, because I think lots of times in life, there's 2 or 3 things that withhold us from opening up to people and really sharing compassion. One of them is you're concerned about the potential commitment this could lead to. It could cost you time, and time is money these days. I mean, we don't have time. So you are concerned that it'll cost you time. The other one is you're concerned about financially. How much will you commit? And I'll share an example with you of that personally. So those are things that withhold us. But if you look at Peter, sometimes you just give the basics. Doesn't have to be money. Doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. Another common question we ask, but where do we start? Just look at our country. How many people are there in need? You just drive out of Midstream at the robot. Every robot from Yard to Midrand has got I probably go through 8, 10 robots in the morning, and every one of them has got beggars. So what is expected of me? Am I going to hand out a 10 Rand or a 5 Rand or something at every robot? No, I don't. I'll be honest, I don't. So what is expected of me? Where do we start? So I want to suggest something. It's something that I came across, which for me was a groundbreaking statement that was made. It says, start by praying the following. You say, "Lord, break my heart for what breaks yours." Now, that was for me a profound statement. If I can get to a point where my heart will soften for the things that soften God's heart, I mean, that will be an amazing revelation. Know what you have in abundance. In other words, all of us have something more than what we need. I read a book once, which I shared with Joanna as well. "Today I am rich." If you went this morning for breakfast and you had more than one cereal or more than one option to eat, you had in abundance. If you went to your closet and there was more than one pair of clothes that you could choose from, you had in abundance, because you can only wear one at a time. And I mean, if you take that perspective, anything that you have in abundance, you should be willing to share or should be able to share. Then you give to God and you say, "God, the little that I have, I give to you." And you ask God to bless and multiply, like he did with the bread and the fish. You have the Holy Spirit within you. Look through his supernatural eyes at the world around you, and then apply what you have to the need that he identifies to you, not through human eyes. You've got to look at the world through supernatural eyes, which we all have the ability because the Holy Spirit is in us. So I want to share two life experiences with you that I went through from a compassion point of view. And the one just cost me time and some effort. But it was customers of ours, was a husband and wife customer that had a pharmacy out to the east in Mpumalanga. And they'd been customers with us for years. And at one point, something in the business went wrong, and they ended up in our office one day, huge debt they incurred. They owed us millions of rands. And they were basically there that day to say, "Listen, they've given up. They don't know anymore. They want to go back. They want to put the place in the market." At that stage, pharmacies didn't really have a value. So they said they'll sell it, and whatever they can achieve or get for the business, they'll pay towards the debt, and the rest, with all due respect, we got to do what we got to do. They'll end up in a legal court fight or something like that. So we decided that day to open up their numbers, and we started looking at their numbers, and we got the finance guys in, and we worked through their budget, and we were able to identify 1 or 2 problems in the business. And we sent them away with a proper plan. The two of them, husband and wife, put a lot of effort into that business. And I must say, it's such a blessing for me. We were there last week. They had opened their 3rd store 10 years later. They have now got a blooming business. They've turned it around completely, very profitable. Yeah, it's just an amazing story 10 years later, from that point of giving up. And all it took from us, we could that day have handed them over, which is something that we do. I mean, we do go the legal route. So we could have handed them over and probably liquidated them. I mean, that's what we stood to do. So the second one I want to share with you is, it cost me a bit more than time, I must be honest. And at one stage, I wasn't sure while this guy crossed my road. But anyways, it started with our kids are at varsity. They're first and second year in Stellenbosch, and we're a very close-knit family. So, yeah, my wife and I try and spend as much time in Cape Town as we can close to the kids. I think the kids want to get away from me when they go to varsity. We refuse. So we follow. So we try and spend as much time with them as we can. But anyway, so when my daughter went to first year this year, both of them are in res. So she was part of the first year's whole res, everything that they do in the hostel for the first week. And we took my son and a friend of him out for breakfast. Now, this friend of his is also from here. They're farmers in Bobsfontein. And a young man by the name of Gerard. Gerard is a very likable young man. I really enjoy him. He's a real boerseer. So I've got a lot of time for him. So Gerard, halfway through breakfast, says he has to excuse himself because he's got to go to a book launch with a granny of his. I thought, yes, okay. A youngster, second year in varsity, going to a book launch with his granny. And I said, but Gerard, tell me more. Who's this guy? Who's the book about? He said, no, the author is the guy. It's a guy that's paralyzed, and he has written a book about his life. I said to him, Gerard, I love autobiographies. You've got to get me a book. You've got to get me a copy of it. So Gerard is off, and, the day goes by, and we come back home, and probably about a month later, we head down to Stellenbosch again to follow the kids. And Gerard rocks up at my door, and he hands me this book by Zamele Mavata, Against All Odds. And Zamele had gone and dedicated this to me and said to Christopher Williams, love, Zamele Mavata. I've never met the man. And I said to Gerard, yes, it's such a blessing for me, such an amazing gift that you've given me. But I don't want to read the book. I want to meet the man. I want to go out to him. So I said to Gerard, get me the address. So Gerard gets the address and he puts me into contact with Zamele. Zamele sends me a pin. I head out into Stellenbosch. I'll actually share some of the WhatsApps that we shared at that point. But he sends me a pin and I head up to the Jonkershoek area in Stellenbosch. Now, those of you that know Stellenbosch, it is beautiful out there. I mean, that Jonkershoek Pass Road is beautiful. It's just about 5 km out of town. And as I head up there, I'm obviously in a rental. Rentals can go anywhere. So I head up on this dirt road, and it's really a bad dirt road. But I come from the farm, so I don't mind dirt roads. And the car can do it. I mean, it's a rental. So I head up this track, and I end up there. I get to a little village. There's probably about 10 houses around. I'm starting to ask, I want to meet Zamele. Where's Zamele? So they point me right at the top. So I come to this little wooden cottage. And here is Zamele and his wife sat on the stoop. And I walk in and greet them and introduce myself, and they invite me into the house. And I walk into this little, if you can call it a living room. I mean, I walk into a living room, there's 2 couches, and they had this glass sliding door looking up at the mountain. And as I stood at that door, all of a sudden, there's a ray of sunshine that shines into that house. And I just feel the Holy Spirit in that house. I just feel the peace, and I just feel the Spirit. And I went and I sat down. They offered me coffee, and I said, Zamele, I'm here today, firstly, to thank you for your book. But secondly, I haven't read your book because I want to hear your story. And for the next half an hour, I sat on his couch, and he was sharing his life story with me. And I'm telling you, it was, I get emotional about it because it's an amazing story. This guy's just got an amazing story to share. And in any case, so he says to me, I mean, he went through things like his poverty. Firstly, he grew up in a rural area. He never saw a car in his life. Never. So when he was 6 years old, he developed polio. So he was still playing out with his boots outside. He said we probably bathed, if it was once a week, was a lot. I mean, food was the odd time, now and again. So at 6 years old, the one morning he gets up and he can't get up. So he calls his mom and he says, Mom, I can't move. So the mom picks him up and she carries him, I don't know how many miles, to a train station. They get onto the train and they're off to the city. In the city, they end up at this hospital, who's run, it's a nun hospital, so it's like a nun school. And they take care of them. And long story short, I mean, lots of years later, what happens, he gets taken up into school. He's now almost a paraplegic. And he goes into this normal school. Now, he says, I come from that environment where I've never seen a car in my life. All of a sudden, I end up on a train. I end up in a hospital in a first world environment where there's clean bedding, there's food 3 times a day. This guy doesn't know what to do with himself. And he ends up in a normal school. Mom has now left him. She's gone back home. 6 months later, the first holiday, the nuns take him home in a car. So he rocks up there. Family doesn't know he's coming. I mean, he just rocks up there. They drop him off, and all of a sudden he's with the family again. He says now he starts playing again. I mean, the kids are now used to him in a wheelchair, so they play with him. A month later, mom is still out in the field. Yeah, rocks up a car. Holidays now passed. The nuns load him in the car. No one greets him. He's off to school again for 6 months. And this was the life that he led. And he said he constantly had this battle between poverty, nothing, not used to anything, not even food always. And then he goes back to a first world country or to a first world environment. So just an amazing story to tell. But when he told me his story that day, I was so humbled and I was so thankful when I left him. And I said to him that day, you know what, Zamele, I want to fly you up to Joburg. We've got our conference, I think it was 2 months later, and I want you to be a speaker at our conference. I want you to come and tell your story to 500 delegates. And we flew him up any case later. But in the interim, I think it was the 7th of April, I get a photo from Zamele on WhatsApp. And he sends me a photo of his house, but there's no roof. I said, yes. He says to me, the rooftop of our house has been blown away by the windstorm. Zamele. That's all he says. And then he sends me a video clip, which I want to share with you. Can you go to that video clip, please? So that was his house. That's where I went in that day. I mean, it's a bit bigger than a shack. But the environment, you can see the mountains and the environment. There's Zamele with his wife. This was a storm on the 7th of April. So when I got that message that day, I went into the house and I said to my wife, yes, mama, ek weet nie. Zamele het vir my hierdie ding gestuur and I'll be honest with you, ek weet nie wat ek moet doen hierso. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I was overwhelmed. I've met the guy once. I loved his story. I'm going to fly him up to the conference. All of a sudden, he sends me, who's just met a month ago, he sends me this picture of his house blowing away. Now, I mean, for me, it was a battle to understand why did Zamele send it to me? What's his expectation? You know, when you share with someone, my house is just blown away. What are you expecting from me? I said to my wife, it's a battle for me, honestly. And probably for about 2 nights, I couldn't sleep, praying about it and saying, God, I honestly don't know what you expect of me. You know, and I started getting into the mindset to say, okay, there's probably a contribution that I can make. You know, now I'm starting to do sums. What's it going to cost to repair the roof? And I'm getting a figure in my mind. I'm thinking, oh, maybe, you know, I can do a contribution. I'll do a 10,000 Rand contribution towards the house. I think that can solve. So I phoned Zamele the next day and I said to him, Zamele, I'm so sorry to hear about your house. I mean, what are you doing? Where are you living now? I said, no, we've made a plan. We've taken a sail over the house. We're living in it. I mean, it's a bit wet and it's still raining and it's still stormy, but yeah, we're all right. So I said to him, okay, what is the plan? I mean, what can we do? He said, well, the guy that built the house is a professor at the University of Stellenbosch. He's a doctor in wood sciences. So I said, okay, put me into contact with him. Let me start with him. So I meet this Dr. Philip, who happens to be a very youngster. I mean, he's got his first child now. I thought he was a professor of age. So I'm thinking I'm talking to this older, I mean, yet I'm speaking to a okay, that's almost my son's age. But in any case, he happens to be this doctor at Varsity. So a day later, Zamele sends me, he says, hi, Chris, I'm still waiting for Philip Crawford, who's the doctor. He came yesterday to assess the damages. He would come back to me with the amount. Sorry for taking so long. We don't have power since last Saturday. My wife went to town to change the phones. We'll update you soon. Be blessed. He says to me, Philip is the lecturer in the Stellenbosch University. He's the Department of Wood Science. He said he would build the structure for free as long as I get the right material. I will wait for him to come back to me. I said, 100% Zamele, we'll wait for your feedback. Good luck and God bless. I mean, that's always the easy way out. As long as you say, God bless, you think it's done. You know, God's not going to take care of the rest. So he says to me the next morning, he says, hi, Chris, this is the feedback I got from Philip Crawford. He said, if we put a new roof on the old structure, it will cause the whole house to collapse because the house sides are affected also. This is what he's suggesting we should do, a proper new house structure. And so all of a sudden, there goes my 10,000 rand budget. It's out the house. So he forwards me Philip's message, and Philip says, this is now Philip's message to him. He says, "Hi, brother, I did the estimates. New roof for your current house structure will be 45,000 rand. New house, built according to standard, storm and weatherproof, will be 165,000 rand, excluding bathroom. Including bathroom, total 200,000 rand. So 200,000 rand for the house and 45,000 rand for the roof. So all of a sudden, I realized I've got a deficit here. So I wrote to him, I said, "Good evening, Zamele. Let me discuss this with our finance department and foundation, because this game has this foundation, where we take care of people in need like this, or supposedly. Have you got access to any additional sponsorship or funding?" Now, I'm obviously praying that there's lots of guys like myself that's willing to contribute 10,000, and this way we can build this house. Next morning, "Good morning, Chris. No, I don't have any other sponsorship or funding. My family and I depend on my disability grant for basic daily needs. The current damage structure was built with some of the disability grant. Anilla van der Merwe and a once-off donation from different people." Now, that Anilla van der Merwe happens to be Gerard's granny that attended the book launch. The book that I have written has not generated any income yet. So he's written this book. It's not a Barack Obama version. That thing is, so it's a very short version. But in any case, he's trying to sell this to make an income. So in any case, I go to the foundation. I say to them, "Listen, this is the situation. Can we help this guy?" And thinking that, with all respect, in the Dis-Chem environment, 200,000 rand, we could probably afford it in the foundation. Foundation says to me, "Sorry, we don't invest in assets. So we don't put up structures. We invest in healthcare, disabilities, those kind of things, but we don't do structures." So there goes that out the window. So, ends up, I say to him, "All right, Zamele," I said to my wife, "Listen, I'm going to commit to this. Okay, I'm going to take it on myself. I'll say that I'll build the house." I phone Zamele the next morning and say, "Zamele, I'm going to commit to this. Okay, I don't know how I'm going to solve it yet, but I will commit to putting this house up." So I phone Philip. I say, "Philip, what do you need? I will build this house." Philip says, "Listen, I will do all the building for free. I've got contractors that'll help me, and we won't charge you any labor. All you must do is supply the material." So we start off, go with the first budget, buy the first material, and there's a few photos that I'll take you through in terms of what happened afterwards. There's old Zamele at our conference speaking to it. That was his old structure. So there's the first material arrive on site. There they start putting down the foundation. Here's progress. So now we're putting up a proper wood structure. This thing is wind resistant, storm resistant, properly isolated. So in any case, what I realized very quickly, and I hope there's no building contractors here, but I realized that Philip is a doctor in wood science, definitely not in finance. Okay, so the budget that he proposed, we are now at double that budget. Okay, so that's where we are currently. But we've got all the material now to complete the house. So a miracle that happens is when our current CEO, Roy Moraes, he has the story of Zamele, and he later attends our conference. Roy says to me, "Listen, your business division can pay for the whole structure." So all of a sudden, the company steps in and says, "All costs covered." The amazing thing about that is if you look at that environment and the 10 houses that surround Zamele and them, there's so many people there that's jobless that every day get involved in building a structure for free at no cost. Zamele and his wife, it's just two amazing people. I spoke to Johan. I said, if we ever have a business conference at church again, I would actually love to bring Zamele up again, just to share his story so that you can hear it firsthand. But it was just so enlightening to see people standing up, Philip being willing to do all of this work. And Philip's been building since May. We're hopefully going to finish before Christmas. He's been spending most of his Saturdays there at no cost, just building, applying himself. Luckily, he loves wood, obviously, but anyways, and he's built this thing around him. So what was great at the conference, there were a lot of guys that stood up and said, "Listen, I can't help financially, but I can swing a hammer. I'll come and heat the house." There were guys that said, "Listen, I've got someone that can help with the kitchen design." So what this also taught me that sometimes, Johan, you shared it the other day in church when you said, I can't remember the whole story, but it was friends that they were on their way, the family on their way on holiday. And all of a sudden the dad felt bad. He went into a house, rushed him off to hospital. There happened to be a doctor that was off the day, but someone told him to go to hospital for some other reason. And he ends up potentially saving that guy's life. Now, the point being that I think lots of times when God speaks to you and he brings this thing across your life and he says, listen, I want you to help you. If you don't do it, you potentially cause a lot of people who's just waiting for someone to take the first step. You cause them to not act as well. Because if I didn't take that step to say, listen, I commit to this, Philip would never have got involved. All of the guys that's helping in that environment wouldn't have got involved. You know, and it would have been easy for me to step away because I could justify it. I mean, I could have given him 10,000 donation and I don't know what he would have done with it, but yeah, we wouldn't have solved the problem. But lots of times it takes you to do the first commitment. And you must just do it in faith. Although you haven't solved it all. No one says you must solve it all when you start. Lots of times God will provide the rest and God will provide the people around you to pull the wagon through. You must just be the first initiator. So I want to leave you with something that I came across in terms of how to become a passionate leader that I thought was very well written. It says, the good news is that you can train and improve both empathy and compassion. So there's even hope for me at 34, empathy. For compassion, the change starts within. It's a mindset change, something that you got to change inside of yourself. As we practice compassion and see the impact it has on others, we become more compassionate in how we think, feel, and act. It's a positive feedback loop. It's almost like flywheel effect. This effect leads to an environment that's energizing and generative for everyone. That's what makes compassion sustainable and sustaining for leaders. Beyond that's my story on compassion. It was, I mean, there's so much one can say, and I don't think there's a better example than Jesus to use for compassion, because I think that's what his life speaks about. So yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Dankie, Christopher. Altyd 'n blessing om na jou stories te luister en dit so prakties in ons spasie te sit. Ons gaan die groep wat op Zoom is vir julle groet, sodat julle lekker discussion kan hê rondom die onderwerp vir die laaste 15 minute. Ons het dan die voorreg om jou hier te hê en deel van ons discussion te maak. Mag julle geseënde tyd hê. Ek hoop julle het elkeen iets hier huis toe gevat. Blessings vir julle. Dis jy kan vir ons afsit. Kom ons gesels verder. Ons is in jou hande.